Greetings and welcome to the second video outlining and modeling criteria for the Joy Luck Club project. In the first video, we went over the prompt, how it built on the previous assignment, the Joy Luck Club LAT, and what the prompt was asking of individuals responding to the prompt. We essentially established that we are critiquing Amy Tan's use of voice with respect to the purpose we identified for her writing Joy Luck Club. If you'll remember correctly, in literature, the author's voice has to do with the stylistic choices the author makes to convey ideas. This can range from how they use figurative language to how they structure their texts, and in the case of the Joy Luck Club, one can say that a defining characteristic of Amy Tan's voice has to do with how she structures the text, by using parables to introduce each section of the text. It is this very aspect of her voice that we are critiquing in this response with respect to whatever purpose we identified for her writing the novel. In this video, we will review an exemplar in which I model one way that this can be done and how the exemplar meets the assessment criteria. The assessment criteria outlined in the rubric essentially embodies the skills that we went over in the previous assignment, as well as a couple of additional skills that we have also had some practice with before. These include avoiding common fallacies, which is typical of argument writing, but still appropriate since we are providing a critique of the author's stylistic choices that characterize her voice. And they also include the incorporation of multimedia elements, which you will see are all reflected on the rubric for this assignment. So let us look at the first piece of criteria, which has to do with the introduction. Bear in mind, I will only go over these very generally, so if you need an in-depth explanation of these skills, please revisit my video outlining these skills for the Joy Luck Club LAT. So remember that the introductory paragraph has to make connections and distinctions between all ideas and topics being discussed in the response to the prompt, and it has to have a thesis, which is essentially an answer to the question implied in the prompt that you will elaborate upon in the body paragraphs. Let's see how I did these things in my exemplar. You should pause the video to read what I wrote periodically or follow along on the doc for this exemplar that I have posted to Google Classroom. I will also challenge you to thoroughly review the rubric right now and read the exemplar, and then leave a class comment explaining how you think my exemplar met any of the pieces of criteria outlined. So parables and voice are two topics that are mentioned in the prompt, and I explain how they connect by saying that Amy Tan's use of parables is her voice. And in this next sentence, I provide a distinction of sorts by explaining what the function of the parable is in the context of the novel. In other words, why the parables are there. In the next sentence, I make reference to another topic, Amy Tan's purpose, and I connect that topic to the topic of parables, which again is the aspect of Amy Tan's voice that we are critiquing, to Amy Tan's purpose by saying that her use of parables can allow the reader to guess what her purpose is. I assert that because her use of parables is a creative compositional risk, which tends to be seen more in memoirs, and because memoirs tend to be personal, Amy Tan's purpose must have been to tell a personal story. So I basically claim that she wants to inform the reader of her own personal story in a dramatic way. And I use this as a segue to my thesis, where I say that this particular creative compositional risk is not effective considering her purpose, because the specific technique of using parables may lead one to think that her novel is speaking to Chinese people as a group, rather than simply telling her own story. Now, this claim still has to be proven, and I cite my proof in the body paragraphs. Notice how I also employ use of one of the other skills on which we are being graded here, and that is the use of multimedia elements for these purposes seen here on the rubric. Multimedia elements can range from videos to figures, which may include graphs or charts, or tables, as seen here, right after my introductory paragraph. This table basically proves my assertion regarding Amy Tan's purpose of telling her own life story dramatically through these fictional characters, because of the similarities that exist between them. Obviously, I would cite more than one example in this table, but this is just intended to give you an idea of how these multimedia elements can look and what type of content they may contain. Now let's see how I meet any of the criteria of the body paragraphs. In this first sentence, I introduce my subclaim, which essentially states why the use of parables is not effective, considering Amy Tan's purpose. Parables typically speak to experiences of entire groups of people, rather than just one individual. I also provide additional information that basically reinforces what I was trying to convey in my table, that she created different fictional characters to reflect her own experiences. Then I elaborate by providing additional information explaining why her use of parables would be indicative of the purpose that I identified, explaining that the parables are a sort of symbol for the main character's narratives, and that such stylistic choices are typical of memoir writing. I also emphasize how memoirs tend to be personal in nature, but then I elaborate, once more adding additional information, as to why this particular stylistic choice of using parables contradicts her purpose of telling her own personal story. I reiterate the bit that I added in the first sentence of this paragraph about parables having more to do with entire groups of people as opposed to just one person. As such, her inclusion of the parables may cause one to mistakenly believe that her novel is intended to speak for all Chinese people rather than only herself. So I essentially explain why what I had asserted in my subclaim would happen. And in the next paragraph, in which I begin to delve into my text evidence, I begin by once more providing additional information and telling the reader about a specific excerpt in which Amy Tan attempts to tell her own personal story through fictional characters. I also provide additional information that proves this is her purpose, namely the first-person point of view. I then provide my text evidence and explain how this quote proves that she is trying to tell a personal story, as the first-person narration is indicative of Amy Tan speaking for herself through the fictional character of Jing Mei. Then I restate my original claim, indicating that the use of parables goes against this purpose. So this paragraph essentially provides a concrete example that proves what I said in the previous paragraph. Now let's see how I avoid using common fallacies. In this paragraph, I cite evidence from an article explaining that parables usually present universal truths. As such, I am essentially using this quote to substantiate my assertion that use of parables may cause one to think Amy Tan was trying to convey the experience of all Chinese people rather than just herself. By citing evidence in this paragraph, I am providing evidence to support my claim that her use of voice is ineffective, and I explain how this proves that claim. And now for the conclusion, where you recapitulate your main points and explain the significance or implications of the topics explored in the response. In the first two sentences, I basically restate my claim and offer a one-sentence summary of the point that I developed to prove that claim. And the final sentence concludes the response as I state the implications of what was discussed. And I do this by offering a suggestion as to what could have been done to fulfill her purpose as the author. What I suggested was that the narrative would have been more effective had the parable simply been left out. So when concluding a response, you can think of the concluding sentence as a statement that blatantly states what you want the reader to learn from your response or what you want the reader to do, and I did this by offering advice as to how the novel could have been improved, since the entire response was arguing that Amy Tan's use of voice was ineffective. In summation, this is what you have to do. 1. Establish Amy Tan's purpose for writing and how you know this. 2. Determine whether her use of voice was effective or ineffective in accomplishing this purpose. 3. Rationalize your claim with evidence from the text and outside research. The multimedia elements can be incorporated here. And 4. Recap your claim, how you proved it, and state what you want the reader to learn from your response or how you hoped your response would influence the reader. I sent some students a skeleton response sample with sentence starters and suggestions for what type of details to include in each sentence. You may use this if you are struggling and request that I send it to you if I have not done so already. Remember, do not waste unnecessary effort trying to reword what I wrote. You also do not have to agree with me in your response. This isn't even necessarily my true opinion. It is merely an example detailing how you should approach responding to the prompt. I'm looking for a thought process here. I need to see that you put thought into your response. An imperfect response that indicates that you really struggled to develop meaningful ideas in relation to the prompt and communicate them clearly will be far more likely to get you a perfect score than a simple rewording of my response or a copy and paste submission from the internet that will invariably have nothing to do with this prompt. And please, correspond with me through the class comments section under this assignment so I can clarify any misconceptions and so other students can read the comments and benefit from our communications.